I open my eyes, but see nothing. I'm as cold as ice, but I can't bring myself to shiver. My spine and muscles buzz with blasé fatigue, a dull, paralytic soreness across my entire body. I can't hear anything. Not to say there isn't any sound, I'm surrounded by noise, but what I can identify is hardly remarkable, to the tune of some kind of numbing, mechanical whir, like a refrigerator or a halogen light. Everything about this situation is stale and sterile. I'm exhausted. I decide to take stock of the situation for another minute before trying to move. It becomes apparent in this vague gesture to relax that I realize the surface I'm lying upon has no give. Whatever it is that I'm lying on is rigid and flat. Perhaps metal? If I were to fidget, I could decipher a texture, but even the thought tires me. I blink, and my eyes can be heard as my tear ducts fail to work moisture under my eyelids. I have eye drops in my purse, I realize. I should go get them once I'm done here. Once I'm done here? My purse? I'm not wearing anything. Is that bad? I twitch my nose to see if my piercing is still in, and that's gone too. But my missing piercing takes a back seat when I also get a whiff of something horrible. Blood, mixed with latex and plastics, as well as bile and another carnal odor I can't say I recognize. The sniff also inhales a portion of the heavy atmosphere, and I feel, well, I hesitate to say better, but the waves of fatigue that have kept me pacified since coming to receded upon respiration, loosening my arms up a bit. Judging by the strange sensation preceding the expansion of my lungs, especially by such a small amount, I confidently conclude that that was the first breath I've drawn in a few hours. Yet in spite of my discovery of my asphyxiation, I don't find myself desperately grasping for breath. I am, however, bargaining with a feeling I'd compare to being at the bottom of a deep pool, the source of my lethargy identical to the serene pressure felt first in the skull when diving without pressurized gear. I can't bring myself to panic, as I'm already at the point where most succumb to hostile, unyielding waters. Until now. The sniff broke my face to the surface for the one moment it took to remind me of what having air in the lungs feels like, which was just enough of a gasp to redouble my attempt to resurface. I allow my right arm to start feeling around, and as it goes out to my side, I find that my movement is quite restricted. I've made contact with a rugged sheet, which startled me as nothing I felt implied I was in a small space. Not only that, but my arm didn't quite go where I intended. I meant to reach for my chest, as that seemed to be where the odor was coming from, and I wanted to investigate, but my forearm didn't bend as I had instructed it to. My eyes close again. It's not like it helped me focus, since closing both of my eyes blocks out the massive nothing I've been looking at since I woke, but it's the one meditation technique I can reproduce without moving, which isn't enough to shift my thinking away from the fear and anxiety slowly presenting itself. I withdraw another breath through my nose, and consequently gain more articulate control of my arm. My forearm goes to my chest now, but my fingers don't report what they're touching. Not before another breath, at least. In, out. In, out. In, hold. My breathing eventually establishes a tempo. Out. My mind clears as I breathe, but I refuse to rush it, as each breath labors my lungs more. Or, alternatively, I become more conscious of how bad my lungs have gotten. I was driving. That's the first thing I recall. I was driving and my foot got stuck under the accelerator somehow. I probe at my injuries with my right hand before... Oh, fuck. That's my blood, isn't it? Not the most fun way to find out your fingers are working. I use my wrist to navigate my fingers along the gash in my chest I've found. It feels about an inch or two long, and there's no telling how deep, but by how much it gives to how little pressure I can apply with my sparse breathing and weak fingers, it's a wonder how I'm still alive. When my thumb passes over it, I realize the wound I've been exploring is just to the left of my solar plexus. That isn't the only wound, though. When my wrist rests against my chest, I detect a similarly severe lesion lower and to the right this time. And when I move to touch that one, I learn that those two injuries were just a pair in a series of diagonal cuts on my right side that go all the way down to my knee, most of which terminating in one final gouge like the first wound I discovered. Flip-flops. My flip-flops got caught under the accelerator, and I couldn't take them off in time to avoid ramping off that cruelly placed median. My car capsized before it landed in a ditch. That's when my consciousness started staggering. It's hazy after that, but I know beyond doubt that the resulting crash did this to me. Who found me? Moving a single arm has been an ordeal for me, so I couldn't have put myself here. Oh, God, am I dead? The thought makes me forget to breathe, and my tempo is lost. A few minutes of inanimate panic pass before they give in to calculated reasoning I didn't know I was capable of. Of course I'm dead. Or dying. Within the sparse mirages of my post-crash memory, I remember flames, so it's most likely that an explosion sent shrapnel into my body and caused these injuries. But there's something else, too. Something green? I can't recall beyond that. Not that it matters. That said, I am dead, or dying, or possessing my corpse, or whatever's happening right now. Point being, where do I go from here? Should I just get up? With the buzzing of my bodily atrophy relapsing and nothing else left to analyze, I resume my breathing exercise with a lot more cognition to resist. Am I going to have a funeral? The injuries felt pretty gruesome. Will it be closed casket? Oh, Jesus, what if I get cremated? Am I going to feel that, too? If my corpse isn't presentable, what picture of me are they going to use? Is it weird to be particular about that? What about my family? What if... I wrestle back my focus, maintaining the tempo this time. I silence the macabre what-ifs. Frankly, I reason, there's nothing worth freaking out over if I can still breathe. Because if I'm breathing, I'm alive. End of story. I dredge up all the courage I can muster in this generally hazy and bleak awareness of my surroundings, consider the most likely possibility, and send my right hand upwards until it stopped. Yep, I was right. I'm in a body bag. Now, let's get out. Mercifully, body bags a zip from the bottom up, which means I can give myself a start on undoing the seal with my fingernail and a small, constant application of force. Soon there's enough of an opening for light to pour in, and it zaps my eyes. Jesus fucking Christ, they keep this room bright. Even with my eyes closed, it's still far too brilliant. The warm, peach color of the light that can pass through my eyelids still too intense for me to comfortably absorb. With modest difficulty, I put my left palm between my eyes and the light as my right hand coaxes tears out of my tear ducts and into the dry regions of each of my eyeballs. Still, with my left hand over my eyes, I open up the bag and expose my first row of gashes to the light and air. The odor I'd become accustomed to, the pungent carnage and blood and gore, oxidized and warped as I adjusted to the exposure, taking to an even more offensive stench of decay before, just as quickly, being forgotten, tucked somewhere far away from my consciousness. I didn't like how quickly I disregarded such a revolting odor, but my rational side concludes I'd only get distracted by it. I slowly rotate my left hand to let light in, making certain to keep my index finger pressed against my forehead in case a car's headlights or an errant strobe further illuminate the room through the windows. Does this room have windows? I look down, past the indent made by my toes, still covered by the bag, and find the wall the table is flush with doesn't have windows. I guess that makes sense. Why would morgues have windows? Why would morgues... I briefly recognize how bizarrely comfortable I've become with the situation before that recognition, too, fizzles away. I simply can't get distracted right now. Even though I'm confident the lighting conditions here won't change, merely thinking about leaning upwards is exhausting. When I choke down my apathy, respire, and prepare for the maneuver, it suddenly becomes terrifying. No longer is this morgue a room I have to leave, it's now a realm I don't belong in. My attempt to go back to the land of the living and, show up for work tomorrow is sacrilege, unnatural. If I get out of this bag, I'm crossing a line all those religions herald as the beginning of an apocalypse. Even if this isn't religious, what if I'm sick and this small window of consciousness buckles to some kind of zombie virus? I don't want to cause a zombie outbreak. As this maelstrom of fears breaks through to the forefront of my consciousness, a sensation both beyond and within me is cooing, like a lullaby. This sensation is like that of a teacher, or more accurately, an observer. Somehow I can tell they're as confused as I, but are confident about one thing. I must leave. Yet, it's not the dire statement it sounds like. There's a soft pondering behind it, motivated by curiosity instead of anger or malice. There's a pain to it as well. Pangs of thirst, hunger, and suffocation ripple throughout this sensation, as well as another depraved consequence of lacking, which I roughly approximate to disorientation and aimlessness. It's an incomprehensible mayhem, but the more of these ripples of confusion and despair are expressed to me, the less they seem to be bothered by them. I realize that I'm consoling it, and it's consoling me. Never so slightly. It's then I decide I'm ready. I take it slow as I jut my elbow out of the bag, sliding my hand below my shoulder on the inside of the bag until it starts to feel uncomfortable. When I push my torso up, I elevate about 30 degrees before my stomach gets caught on the zipper. Without thinking, I use my left hand to loosen the zipper and inadvertently blind myself again, but in the very small window in which I pushed the zipper down, I had undone the seal enough to expose the entirety of my waist. I didn't close my eyes when I blundered, so I was still somewhat recovering from shock when I noticed how many unique chemicals were in the cupboards. They wouldn't need that many if they were going to embalm me, not to mention the fact that while I was cold, I wasn't refrigerated, so I must have been prepped for an autopsy. That observer from before flickered and made me realize I should probably be more shaken by that idea than I currently am, yet that panic is being held back by them. It's bizarre, not being trusted to feel certain emotions, but at the same time, I don't think I can blame them. I don't learn anything if I panic right now, so in a way, I have more control over myself with the presence of this observer than without, but new idea. Perhaps they're the reason why I'm undead? There's another pang from it, this time a more nebulous wince of what I imagine their headaches feel like. These emotions probably won't be held off forever. Let's not get autopsied. I've gotten to the point where I can comfortably see as long as I keep my face scowled in a tight squint. A lot of details are obscured, and I can only read large print text, but I can make out the key details of the room. I put my left hand down on the outside of the bag and find a sheet of stainless steel parroting the cold temperature this room is kept at. With this better grip on the table, I swivel around and squint at the walls. As much surface area as possible has mounted upon it safety equipment, organization leaflets, storage, and the cupboards from before, most of which are locked by key. This morgue utterly lacks an aesthetic motif. The square edges, wheeled chairs, sleek lighting fixtures over each workspace, I guess, are all form-focused and clinically simple. This looks like an IKEA showcase where nobody was allowed to have any fun. Case in point, the floor plan of the room is essentially a rectangle, and I'm situated at the corner opposite of the door that I hope leads out of here. There is, for lack of a better term, workbenches all along the wall, upon which I'm the last, as I'm dreadfully far away from that door. Following the wall to my left, I realize if I sat up straight, I'd have roughly an inch of clearance before I'd make contact with one of the many cupboards, which remind me of the science labs in high school, except quieter, much colder, and with far too many dead bodies. I take my right hand and place it roughly where it was, but on the other side of the body bag. That puts my hand on the edge of the workspace, and gingerly introduces my fingertips to a small platform filled with light metal implements. Scalpels. I was about to be autopsied. Discarding the thought, I raise my waist and dig my heels to push the body bag away from me, but all the blood that came from my gashes, pooled, and then caked, made it stick to my torso, and I had to exert a disquieting amount of force to break it all off and slide out. I crunch, lean back, and then unfurl again on top of the bag. Dried blood crumbles off of me, and I find myself fixating on it as I rotate and dangle my legs off the workspace. My right leg, while fully functional, is completely fucked. My right arm is quite busted as well. The outfacing skin of my arm is blistered in the better parts and charred in the worst parts, and the grotesque optic is othering enough to discourage me from touching it without reason, which ultimately is for the better. Lastly, my left shoulder has a diagonal strip where my seatbelt was when I was suspended upside down in my car. Sitting on the edge of the workspace also reminds me of high school, a comforting memory where a friend of mine started toying with the chemical safety shower in the corner of the lab whose pipes had long since rusted. I remember she pressed the panel down, and the water which came out was rich with rust and sediment and smelled strongly of hard water deposits. What are the chances there's a shower in here? Fuck staying focused. If there's a shower in here, I'm cleaning this shit off. I slide off of the edge of the workspace, careful not to take the body bag down with me so as to minimize the cleaning that'll have to be done. When I shift my weight onto my legs, I get a bit woozy, but manage to maintain balance. I go to the corner opposite of the door and find a circular area with a sleek set of tubes that stand up from the ground and descend from the ceiling. These tubes are incredibly narrow and just as reflective as the glass, which explains why my initial scan of the room didn't register it as a chem shower. The sleek design justifies my hope that this water won't be rusted. It has a few extra knobs on it, and I consider that this is most likely some kind of multi-purpose installation which I find myself guessing the extra functions of. I recognize the pulley thing at least. I stand under the tube that extends from the ceiling and pull on the cord. A tense second passes as the fluid ducts populate until mercifully clear water cascades over me, and I submit to the torrent. The drain below me becomes a pink swirl as blood and severed tissue are washed away. I run my free hand through my hair and find that a few meager clumps fall out, but I feel liberated. The observer sings a small tune of victory before the flirt extinguishes and resumes their deliberation with my anxieties. A bit of it seeps through, though. Concerns about where my belongings will go, how exactly I'm going to leave this room, what I'm going to do when I get out, if I should replace that when with an if. The observer knows what they're doing, however, as they seem like trivial thoughts that only stupid people would let worry them. The dissonance between what I'm compelled to feel and what I'm currently feeling is also among those things that's shunted into the background. I'm not afraid of my wounds anymore. They are what they are. C'est la vie or whatever. I switch hands so I can run water over my other arm, and it feels great. There has to be soap around here. Probably by the sink that I spot in between glances into the room. While I hate to walk around the room sopping wet, I'd also like to work the last of this caked blood off of my skin, and elbow grease doesn't appear to bother it. While I'm working a large pallet of dried blood off of the part of my stomach between my second and third gouge, I hear that door open.